Disclaimer: this video is created entirely with the assistance of artificial intelligence, AI. All scripts, narration, visuals, and/or background music were generated using AI tools. It is intended for entertainment. Any resemblance to real persons, events, or places is purely coincidental. Chapter 1. Opening: The Shadow of a Name. In the history of Rome, one name echoes like a curse: Caligula. To some, he was a madman who drowned an empire in terror. To others, he was a victim of betrayal, his reputation destroyed by those who wanted him erased. But one thing is certain: in only 4 years of rule, Caligula left a scar on Rome that would never fade. This is his story, his rise, his madness, and his bloody fall. Chapter 2. Childhood in the Camp. Caligula was born Gaius Julius Caesar Germanicus in 12 AD, the beloved son of Germanicus, Rome's most popular general. From the start, his life seemed touched by destiny. As a child, he followed his father on campaigns in Germania. The soldiers adored the boy, dressing him in a miniature soldier's uniform, complete with tiny boots caligae. From this came the nickname that would follow him forever: Caligula, Little Boots. But his childhood was not a tale of endless joy. His father, Germanicus, died suddenly in 19 AD, possibly poisoned under orders of Emperor Tiberius. His mother and brothers fell victim to treason charges, exiled or executed. Caligula, still a boy, survived by remaining silent, watching, and learning. He understood early that Rome was not ruled by love but by fear. Chapter 3. Life under Tiberius. After the fall of his mother and brothers, young Caligula was summoned to live under the watchful eye of Emperor Tiberius. The emperor had retreated to the island of Capri, a place of breathtaking cliffs and glittering seas. But beneath the beauty of the island lurked fear, suspicion, and cruelty. For Capri was not a paradise, it was a prison, a palace of shadows. Tiberius was an emperor consumed by paranoia. Surrounded by informers, spies, and accusers, he trusted no one. Executions were frequent, punishments creative. Senators lived in terror of a single word spoken against them. And into this den of fear stepped Caligula, a boy who had already learned the price of survival. Caligula quickly understood what was required. He flattered Tiberius, bowed to him, watched, listened, and said nothing that could betray his thoughts. Outwardly obedient, inwardly calculating, he became an actor in his own life, playing the role of a loyal ward while quietly absorbing every cruelty, every lesson in power. Capri was a place whispered about in Rome with horror. Ancient writers tell us it was filled with decadence, cruelty, and forbidden pleasures. They say Tiberius indulged in unspeakable acts, surrounding himself with boys, girls, and creatures of excess. Caligula was forced to witness it all. Some say he even participated, not out of desire, but to please the emperor and protect his own life. Whether truth or rumor, one thing is certain: Capri scarred him forever. Tiberius once said of his young ward, "I am nursing a viper in Rome's bosom, a falcon who will one day set the world ablaze." He saw in Caligula not just obedience, but ambition, not just survival, but hunger. And yet, Tiberius spared him, grooming him as a possible heir. Years passed. Caligula wore the mask of loyalty, but inside, the boy who had once been Little Boots was hardening into something else, watching, waiting, preparing. Chapter 4. Rise to Emperor. In 37 AD, the reign of Tiberius came to an end. After years of paranoia and cruelty, the old emperor lay dying on the island of Capri. Whispers swirled that he had considered passing the throne not to Caligula, but to his great-nephew, Gemellus. Yet fate, or perhaps Caligula's cunning, decided otherwise. Ancient rumors claim that as Tiberius struggled for breath, Caligula or one of his allies smothered him with a pillow. Whether truth or legend, the result was the same. The old tyrant was dead, and the young viper he had raised was free. Rome would soon know the name of Caligula, not as a boy in boots, but as emperor. When news of Tiberius's death reached Rome, the city erupted in joy. Senators cheered, citizens filled the streets, and soldiers hailed Caligula as their new princeps. After years of suspicion and cruelty under Tiberius, the people believed they had found a savior. For Caligula was the son of Germanicus, the golden boy Rome had loved. His bloodline connected him to Augustus himself. To the Roman people, he was not just an emperor, but a promise of renewal. At first, Caligula did not disappoint. He granted amnesty to political prisoners, restored honors to his mother and brothers, and ended treason trials. He gave generous donations to the people, staged magnificent games, and honored the memory of his father Germanicus. Rome adored him. The Senate praised him. Soldiers worshipped him. For the first months of his reign, Caligula was everything the empire had hoped for. But shadows lingered behind the light. Within 6 months of his reign, Caligula fell gravely ill. For weeks he hovered near death, and when he finally recovered, the Rome that welcomed him would never be the same. The emperor who rose as a savior would soon be remembered as a monster. Chapter 5. The Turning Point. At the beginning of his reign, Caligula was hailed as a hero, a savior of Rome. But in the autumn of 37 AD, only months after taking power, the emperor fell gravely ill. For weeks he lingered near death. Rome held its breath, fearing that their young princeps, their golden hope, would be lost. The people prayed, sacrifices were made, temples filled with offerings. And when he recovered, there was joy, but also something darker. Something inside Caligula seemed to have changed. Whether it was the trauma of his near death, the effects of illness on his mind, or the corruption of unchecked power Rome could not say. But the emperor, who had once promised mercy and generosity, began to reveal a new face, cruel, unpredictable, and insatiable. His first targets were those closest to him. He executed Gemellus, the young heir Tiberius had favored, accusing him of treason. He forced Marcus Silanus, his own father-in-law, to commit suicide. Senators who had once celebrated his rise now lived in constant dread. For Caligula's smile no longer promised kindness, it promised danger. But cruelty was not enough. Caligula demanded worship. He ordered temples built in his honor, priests to serve his cult, and statues of gods to be altered with his own likeness. To Caligula, he was no mere emperor, he was divine. Rome's traditions of moderation and balance shattered before his ambition. What Augustus had veiled with dignity, Caligula shouted with madness. The Rome that had celebrated his rise began to whisper. Senators grew uneasy, citizens grew fearful, and within the palace walls, Caligula's transformation was complete. The young emperor who once carried the nickname Knitted Boots was gone. In his place stood a man who believed himself a god and ruled like a monster. Chapter 6: The Mad Emperor. With his recovery, Caligula was no longer the same man. The young emperor who once promised mercy and justice began to rule with cruelty, arrogance, and excess. The people of Rome had welcomed a savior. What they received was a tyrant. The ancient historians Suetonius, Cassius Dio, and Tacitus filled their pages with stories of Caligula's depravity. Some may be exaggerated, born of hatred and revenge. Yet the picture they paint is chilling. An emperor who declared himself a living god, demanded temples for his worship, and drained Rome's treasury in a year of extravagance. He mocked senators by inviting them to lavish banquets, then bursting out in laughter reminding them he could order their deaths at any moment. He is said to have committed forbidden acts with his sisters Agrippina, Drusilla, and Livilla, using them to flaunt his power. When Drusilla died, he ordered her deified as a goddess, swearing that she had been his equal in both passion and rule. But perhaps the most infamous story was of his horse Incitatus. Ancient writers claim Caligula gave it a marble stable, jeweled collars, and attendants dressed as nobles. Some say he even planned to appoint the horse as consul, mocking the Senate by proving that even an animal could govern Rome better than they. His cruelty was not limited to humiliation. Executions were frequent. Punishments were creative and terrifying. Some victims were forced to watch their own deaths in mirrors. Others suffered long before the final blow. To Caligula, cruelty was entertainment. To Rome, it was a nightmare. And yet, one must ask, was this truly madness or calculated theater? By making himself unpredictable, by turning fear into a weapon, Caligula ensured that no senator, no general, no citizen felt safe enough to conspire. He ruled not through love, as Augustus had, but through terror. But terror breeds hatred, and in Rome, hatred is never far from conspiracy. Chapter 7: Fear and Opposition. As Caligula's reign descended further into excess and cruelty, the fear he inspired began to curdle into hatred. Senators whispered in secret, soldiers grumbled in their barracks, and citizens who once celebrated his name now trembled at the sound of it. Rome had seen tyrants before, but never one who wore madness as openly as Caligula. He mocked the Senate relentlessly, stripping away its dignity. He paraded senators like servants, forced them to run beside his chariot, and humiliated them in front of the people. Each insult chipped away at their pride until resentment became a fire burning in secret. Even the Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite protectors of the emperor, were unsettled. Caligula demanded loyalty but offered only scorn. He ordered executions at random, reminding even his guards that their lives belonged to him. For men sworn to protect him, this was not loyalty, it was bondage. The people, too, began to suffer. Crushed by new taxes, forced to fund Caligula's endless games and spectacles, they grew restless. He built lavish ships, feasts, and temples for himself, while famine and poverty gnawed at the streets of Rome. What had begun as love now turned to bitterness. Whispers grew louder. Senators whispered to soldiers. Soldiers whispered to conspirators. A shadow began to gather in Rome's heart, a belief that the empire could no longer endure the madness of Caligula. A plan was forming, a plan to end his reign in blood. Chapter 8: Assassination. By the year 41 AD, the whispers of conspiracy had hardened into resolve. Senators, equestrians, and even members of the Praetorian Guard now shared one dangerous thought: Caligula must die. But killing an emperor was no simple task. The moment chosen would need to be swift, decisive, and above suspicion. The leader of the plot was Cassius Chaerea, a Praetorian officer whom Caligula had mocked mercilessly. The emperor ridiculed his voice, calling him weak and unmanly. For Chaerea, what began as humiliation turned to vengeance. Soon, daggers were readied, and the stage for murder was set. The chosen day came during a series of public games. Caligula, delighted with the spectacle, moved freely among his guards and officials, believing himself untouchable. But the conspirators had already chosen the moment when the emperor left the theater and walked through a narrow corridor of the palace. As Caligula entered the passageway, Chaerea struck first. A dagger plunged into the emperor's neck. Others followed, stabbing wildly, as Caligula screamed in rage and disbelief. The man who thought himself a god now lay bleeding on the marble floor, slain, not by legions or rivals, but by those who once swore to protect him. According to some accounts, his final words were a plea for mercy. To others, they were curses spat at his killers. But mercy was gone, and Rome was ready to be free of him. Blow after blow, dagger after dagger, until the emperor lay still. The assassins did not stop with him. His wife Caesonia was murdered. His infant daughter's head was dashed against a wall. The conspirators sought not just to kill a man, but to erase his bloodline so that the empire could never again be ruled by Caligula's kin. And so it was that the reign of Caligula ended in blood after just 4 years. Rome had rid itself of its mad emperor, but with his death came uncertainty. Who would rule next? Would the Senate restore the Republic, or would another emperor rise to power? Chapter 9: Legacy and Historical Memory. Caligula's death shocked Rome. For a brief moment, the Senate considered restoring the Republic, hoping the nightmare of emperors might finally be over. But the dream was short-lived. The Praetorian Guard, unwilling to lose their power, declared Caligula's uncle Claudius the next emperor. And so the cycle of imperial rule continued. But Caligula himself did not vanish so easily. His name endured in whispers, in scrolls, and in memory. To some, he was the warning of what absolute power could unleash. To others, he was the perfect example of Rome's corruption, the emperor who exposed the cruelty behind the marble mask. Historians painted him as a monster, the emperor who declared himself a god, who bathed in luxury while his people starved, who turned cruelty into entertainment. Yet history is written by survivors, and we must ask, how much was truth, and how much was vengeance from those he had humiliated? Was he truly mad, or merely a ruler who pushed fear too far? Was he a god in his own mind, or a man crushed by power and paranoia? The truth lies buried beneath centuries of bias, lost between myth and memory. What remains certain is this: Caligula's reign became a symbol, a symbol of tyranny, of excess, of the danger that lurks when one man holds the power of life and death over an empire. Rome would never forget him, and neither has history.